I have created this cozy pixel art river scene with a landing stage and a small boat for my game. In fact, this scene shows the river and the landing stage that already appeared in this scene, which was actually the first scene that I had created for the game. And during the creation of this new shot of the same spot in my game world, I learned 3 important general pixel art lessons which I will share with you in this video. The first lesson I learned is that it really pays off to spend sufficient time in the initial sketching phase, especially when you are creating a scene that shows an already existing location from a different angle. As you can see, I determined the angle at which I wanted to show the shoreline very early in the process. This gave me a general subdivision of the canvas into the river part and the land part. And it also gave me an indication of the angle at which I wanted to show the landing stage. For a convincing perspective of the landing stage, I felt that 2 vanishing points would be good to use. And since I was going for a rather close-up view of the scene, at least compared to the original overview scene, those 2 vanishing points needed to be placed outside of the image frame. So I expanded the canvas and added the 2 points on a separate layer. As you can see, I also placed the main character sprite of my game in the scene to get the overall size of the landing stage down correctly. And with the vanishing points and the reference character in place, I started constructing the shape of the landing stage. And now came the part of the sketching phase where I struggled a bit, and it had to do with the viewing angle that I had chosen. I went back and forth between the overview scene and the new scene to figure out what details should be visible in the new shot. In a 3D game or an HD 2D hybrid game, all you needed to do here is place a camera object in the new spot and configure its properties. But since this project is made with good old classical 2D pixel art, I had to figure this out myself without the help of a 3D engine. One obvious thing that needed to be in the new scene was the path that leads to the landing stage, so I added that one. The tricky parts then were the fence, the car and the log cabin. I was playing around with some ideas of how to add those correctly to the scene, but I felt that this was not going in the right direction, because it didn't match with the path that connects the landing stage and the buildings, and it didn't match with the overall perspective I had chosen. But perspective was not the only issue here. I also felt that having those details in the background would add additional points of interest for the viewer. And I didn't actually want the viewer's eyes to wander off to those parts of the image, because the star of the show in this one should be the landing stage and the boat. I eventually realized that not having the fence, the car and the house in the background would actually solve the problem both on the perspective level and also on the image composition level. But I still felt that even without those objects, the background needed some more details other than just some flat grass. So I decided to roughly sketch some trees and bushes, even if there were only a few trees and no bushes shown in the original overview scene. So I took a note to fix that inconsistency later in the project by simply adding more trees and bushes in the original scene too. Then I finished the sketch by adding the boat and some rope to moor it to the landing stage. And now it was time to start refining the sketch by adding details, adding shading and highlights, which eventually led me to the second lesson I learned from this piece. I started adding details to the landing stage by first subdividing it into individual wooden planks. Then I added some highlights to the poles in the water and also highlights to the wooden planks themselves. Then I added slightly more chaotic shading lines to the planks to give them a more natural look. And once this was done, I used the shading tool to add some finishing touches to the shading and highlighting of the landing stage as a whole. So far so good, no problems here, and the result looked alright to me. The next thing I did was work on those bushes, for which I created a custom brush and started adding a first version of the leaf structure like this. And then I started experimenting with texturing the ground. For this I created another custom brush and I started using it to add shades and highlights all over the scene. With another custom brush I made a simple grass texture and I placed patches of grass on the ground like this. And I finished the ground by adding shadows from the bushes and trees. Then I started refining those trees by first creating the trunks and branches and using another custom brush to create the leaves. And then I figured that all this didn't look right yet. And I took away the second lesson from this piece. Custom brushes are a very powerful tool, but always make sure not to add too much noise and detail, because it might break consistency with the rest of the art style in your project. Because this is exactly what happened here. The image is not terrible, but with all those details all over the place, which were the result of using the custom brushes I created, it reminded me more of the style of a painting, and it didn't match the art style of the other scenes that I had already created for the game. So from this second lesson, I figured that I needed to start over with texturing the ground. So I went back to the flat green color that I started out with. What I did actually like from the first attempt was the idea of patches of grass everywhere, so I started doing that again, but this time with more variation in the grass brushes, and also taking into account that the grass should become smaller towards the top part of the image. Next, I added again the shadows of the trees and bushes. You can already see at this stage that the overall ground structure is much less noisy and more friendly to the eye. Then I added some general shading structure by subdividing the grass into a light part in the far back, a medium green in the middle and a darker green in the front. And to finish texturing the ground, I went back to the custom brush I had created earlier, but this time I made sure to use it in a way so that the result would not have as much detail and instead show bigger connected clusters of the same green tone. So now that this problem was fixed, it was time to start working on the water and the boat. For the water, I used the same idea as for the ground. I created a custom brush and added texture to the water surface like this. Here I felt that slightly more noise and detailing was not so bad, as this emphasized the effect of a flowing river. For the boat, I changed its shape based on the chosen perspective, and I changed also the color from gray to green. But I soon realized that green was not a good choice here, because with all the other green tones in the scene, the boat didn't pop as much as I would like it to. So I decided to go all the way back to the opposite side of the color wheel and made the boat red instead. And this I like much more. I then kept working on the boat surfaces and tweaking the color values to keep it readable and distinguishable from the surrounding pixels of the water. And it was a bit tricky to get it down right, but eventually I was happy enough with it. Not 100% happy, and maybe I will go back to it at a later point in time, but for now I felt it was good enough. The last thing that was still missing was texturing the path, so I did that too. Again, keeping a close eye on the color values and not to make the surrounding bush bleed too much into the path and vice versa. And once this was done, I felt that something was still off here, and it led me to the third lesson that I took away from this piece. The third lesson I learned was that using a custom brush can not only result in too much noise and detailing, but it can also result in visible patterns and repetition in places where it's not desired. In this case, I'm talking about the bushes and partially also the trees. Because I had created the leaves with the same custom brush throughout the entire scene, I now felt that I needed to break open the resulting patterns a bit more, to avoid that they look like copy-paste versions of each other. So once again, the shading tool was my friend, and I started adding more shades and depth to the leaf structures, and I also gave each individual tree trunk a different shape and form. And once I was happy with the trees, I did the same for the bushes. One of the last cleanups I did was the shadow that the boat casts onto the water, because now I felt that there was too much shadow on the right side of the boat while the light was actually coming from that same direction. And after some more cleaning up of the water surface by removing some of the individual pixels that were still there, this is how the scene looked like. And from the creation of the trees and bushes, and especially the second and third lesson that I had learned here, I figured that this way of creating trees and bushes was actually a nice method for beginning pixel artists. So I took all that information and I created a tutorial in Aseprite in which you can learn all the details of how to create trees and bushes like I just did. If you'd like that, you can find it here, and I will see you there in a bit.